Entitled sister cheated on me with my boyfriend, got pregnant, and my entitled mom took her side. My mom even planned a shotgun wedding and cut me out of their will because I refused to support or attend the wedding. But guess what? I got the last laugh. I met him when I was a starry-eyed freshman, just figuring out how to navigate life on my own. He was the senior who seemed to have it all: confidence, a sharp mind, and this uncanny ability to make you feel like the only one in the room. At the time, it felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. When he told me he had left college a few years earlier to help with his dad's business before returning to finish his degree, it only made him seem more grounded, more real. We were together for 2 years. 2 whole years of my life where I thought I had everything figured out. Late-night conversations, shared dreams of the future, marriage, maybe kids someday, but only after we'd built careers we were proud of. He was my first serious relationship, and I believed in us. God, I was so naive. After a year of dating, I proudly introduced him to my family. I was excited, like, look at this amazing guy I found. My parents seemed to like him well enough. My mom, ever the nitpicking matriarch, complained he wasn't polished enough. But my dad seemed impressed that he had worked in his family's business. Even my little brother thought he was cool. As for my sister, well, I didn't notice it back then, but in hindsight there were signs. She was 18 at the time, all bright-eyed and giggly whenever he was around. She asked him endless questions: what he was studying, the kind of music he liked, if he could help her with some school project. I thought it was innocent, like a younger sibling looking up to someone older and cooler. God, how blind I was. Fast forward another year, and things started feeling off. He began making frequent trips back home, 2 or 3 weekends a month. He'd say he was helping his dad wrap up loose ends with the family business, and I bought it without question. Why wouldn't I? I trusted him completely. The truth hit me like a freight train one evening when my sister pulled me aside, crying. At first, I panicked, thinking something terrible had happened to her. Maybe she was hurt or in trouble. Instead, she dropped the bombshell. She was pregnant. And guess who the father was? Yeah, my boyfriend. I can't even put into words what I felt in that moment. It was like my stomach had been ripped out and thrown into a blender. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was listen to her blubbering excuses. How it had just happened, how she didn't mean to hurt me. Hurt me? She destroyed me. As for him, that spineless bastard didn't even try to deny it. It's complicated, he said. Complicated? No, forgetting an anniversary is complicated. Mixing up schedules is complicated. This was betrayal on a level I didn't think possible. You'd think my mom would be on my side, right? That she'd rip into them for what they did to me? Nope. Her main concern was the family's reputation. We can't let this get out, she said, like she was managing some PR disaster. Sure, she slapped my sister, but within hours, she was already planning damage control. And her brilliant solution? A shotgun wedding. My sister, barely 19, was going to marry my 27-year-old boyfriend. Also, they could save face and make sure their baby wasn't born out of wedlock. That was the night I walked out of that house and never looked back. Part 2. When I say I walked out, I mean I stormed out like the place was on fire. My boyfriend had been sneaking around with my teenage sister. My sister sat there crying like she was the victim. And my mom? Oh, my effing mom. She turned it into some kind of twisted family meeting to decide next steps. And the next steps? Oh, they didn't involve holding anyone accountable. Nope. Her big idea was to throw a wedding, turn their betrayal into a picture-perfect little Hallmark moment. My sister, a teenager, marrying the guy who had told me I was his soulmate just weeks earlier. But in my mom's mind, the baby came first, and I was just collateral damage. I barely made it back to my apartment before I completely broke down. I screamed into a pillow, threw whatever I could get my hands on, just trying to get the rage out. But no amount of yelling or smashing stuff could erase the hollow ache in my chest. It was like my heart had been ripped out and replaced with a ticking bomb. And then the calls started. My mom, demanding I be mature about this. Mature? Are you kidding me? She wanted me to be mature while she rewarded betrayal with a goddamn wedding. The final straw came when they told me about the inheritance. Half of what was supposed to be mine from my grandparents was now being used to fund their perfect little life. My mom had the nerve to act like she was doing me a favor by leaving me anything at all. "I know this is hard, sweetie, but think about the baby," she said. "Screw that. Screw the baby. Screw all of it." That's when I decided to blow their dirty little secret wide open. If they wanted to keep their skeletons in the closet, too bad. I was about to kick the door down. I went straight to Facebook and laid it all out. The full story, sparing no details. How my boyfriend had been sneaking around with my sister, how my mom was orchestrating a wedding to save face, and how my inheritance was being stolen to bankroll their nightmare. I even posted screenshots of texts from my ex where he admitted he was torn but ultimately chose my sister. The fallout was immediate. The post went viral and my phone blew up. Some people were horrified and supportive. Others, flying monkeys from my family, called me out for humiliating my sister and airing dirty laundry. One relative even had the gall to say, "You're better than this." Better? What part of this situation suggested I should take the high road? My mom was livid. She left me a voicemail that started with screaming and ended with calling me jealous, bitter, and ungrateful. Ungrateful. Like I was supposed to be grateful that she was screwing me over to play savior to my cheating ex and my sister. Of course, I didn't go to the wedding. The idea of sitting there watching them play happy family made me want to vomit. But my absence didn't go unnoticed. My mom spun it into a narrative that I was too jealous of my sister for getting married first. Can you believe that? They reduced my heartbreak and betrayal to some petty sibling rivalry. It was disgusting. The only person in my corner was my younger brother. He called me after the wedding to apologize for the circus we were born into. "They're nuts," he said. "Mom's acting like this is some Jane Austen novel, and Dad's just letting it happen. I don't know how you're dealing with this, but I'm here for you." His support was everything. He was the only one who didn't try to guilt or gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. Still, the isolation was brutal. I blocked my parents, my sister, and anyone who tried to drag me back into their mess. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me process the anger and grief. But the betrayal left scars that I couldn't ignore. For 2 years, I rebuilt my life without them. I focused on work, made new friends, and finally started to feel like I could breathe again. And then my dad died. It all fell apart when my boyfriend of 2 years betrayed me in the worst possible way, with my younger sister. I found out not from him, but from her, in a teary confession that left me numb. She was pregnant. She claimed it was a mistake. But how could it be? You don't trip and fall into someone's bed. The man I thought was my soulmate turned out to be a liar. And the sister I'd spent my life protecting shattered every ounce of trust one had in her. As if that wasn't bad enough, my mother didn't just take their side. She orchestrated the damage control. She treated the situation like a scandal in a Jane Austen novel, smoothing it over with a rushed wedding and a fake smile. I was the villain in her eyes, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I refused to support their betrayal. The worst part? She and my father took part of my inheritance. Money I'd been counting on, to help my sister and my ex build their new life together. It was a slap in the face I couldn't ignore. I tried to stand up for myself, but the backlash was swift and cruel. Relatives I thought I could trust swallowed my mother's narrative whole, painting me as the jealous, spiteful daughter who couldn't let go. Their whispers and pointed glances followed me everywhere, like knives in my back. The isolation was suffocating. The only person who stood by me was my younger brother. After the wedding, he called me in disbelief. "They're nuts," he said. "Mom's acting like this is some grand love story, and Dad's just letting it happen. I don't know how you're dealing with this, but I'm here for you." His words were a lifeline. He didn't try to justify their actions or guilt me into forgiving them. He just listened, and for that I was grateful. Still, the pain was unbearable. The betrayal left scars I couldn't ignore, and cutting ties with my family felt like tearing my heart out. I blocked my parents, my sister, and anyone who tried to drag me back into their mess. Therapy became my salvation, helping me process the anger, grief, and loss of the family I thought I had. My therapist called it grieving the family you wanted but never had. It was a long, painful process, but it helped me see the truth. Their toxicity wasn't my fault, and I didn't owe them forgiveness. For 2 years, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, made new friends, and slowly started to breathe again. The weight of their betrayal lifted as I found my own strength. But just as I began to feel like I could move on, my father died. Against my better judgment, I went to the funeral. Part of me hoped for closure, proof that, in his own messed up way, he cared about me. The service was just as fake and suffocating as I'd imagined. My mother sobbed dramatically in the front row, clutching a tissue like she was auditioning for a soap opera. My sister sat beside her, visibly pregnant again, while her husband, my ex, looked awkward as hell. I stayed in the back, avoiding their glances and whispering. Before the service, my uncle, my dad's brother, pulled me aside. "I know you've been through hell," he said, his voice low. "Don't let them make you feel like you don't belong here. Your dad was proud of you, no matter what it might have seemed like." His words hit me harder than I expected. Proud? Of what? I'd cut ties with the family and barely spoken to my dad in years. What was there to be proud of? After the service came the will reading. I hadn't planned on sticking around for it, but my brother convinced me. He'd heard whispers from our uncle that Dad might have done right by me in the end. I didn't believe it, not after everything, but curiosity got the better of me. The lawyer started with the usual legal formalities, but when he got to the asset division, the room froze. My mother sat smugly, my sister's anticipation written all over her face. Then came the bombshell. 40% of my dad's estate, almost half, was left to me. My mother and brother split the remainder, with a small trust set aside for my sister's kids. Nothing for my sister herself. Her face twisted into something unholy, and I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of vindication. But the real surprise came when the lawyer handed me a sealed letter from my dad. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it gutted me. He apologized for not standing up for me when everything fell apart, admitting he'd been weak and afraid of rocking the boat. He told me he admired my strength, mentioning how I'd helped with the mortgage on their house when I got my first job. "I want you to have what's rightfully yours," he wrote. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to someone in that family. Predictably, my sister lost her mind. "She doesn't deserve any of it," she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "Dad wouldn't have wanted her to have more than me." The lawyer calmly explained that Dad's wishes were clearly documented, but she wouldn't let it go. She turned on me, her face red with fury. "You're so selfish. You're ruining everything." Like always, like she hadn't been the one to blow up my life in the first place. My mother wasn't much better. Later, she pulled me aside, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't even need the money," she hissed. "Your sister has 2 children to think about. How can you be so heartless?" I stared at her, numb. "How can you be so blind?" I shot back. "She made her bed. Let her lie in it. I'm not giving her a single cent." The will stood, and my sister's threats to challenge it in court went nowhere. The lawyer had receipts for every decision Dad made, and she didn't have a leg to stand on. But she wasn't done. A few weeks later, the harassment began. Angry texts and voicemails, slashed tires, and finally, breaking into my apartment and trashing the place. She left a note that said, "You owe me." The police caught her on camera, and she admitted to it, claiming she was hormonal and desperate. She got a hefty fine and a restraining order. But the kicker? My mom praised her for taking the blame to protect her husband, who was also involved. This family never learns. Cutting my sister out of my life was easy. She'd burned every bridge. My mother was harder. Some part of me still craved her approval, her love. But she never apologized, never admitted she was wrong. Instead, she doubled down, leaving guilt-tripping voicemails and spinning the narrative that I was the cold-hearted villain. My brother, fed up with the toxicity, eventually cut ties too. With time, therapy, and my brother's support, I found peace. I built a life I'm proud of, traveling, making new friends, and learning to trust again. My sister's life, meanwhile, spiraled. Her relationship with my ex was as toxic as you'd expect, and my mother continued to enable her. They reached out occasionally, but I ignored them. When my sister sent a long email apologizing and asking to reconnect, I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. There was nothing left to say. People say family is everything, but that's bull. Family isn't about DNA. It's about love, respect, and trust. And when those things are gone, what's left? Obligations? Guilt? Screw that. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. It hurts, but it's worth it. My revenge is simple. I'm happy, successful, and free from their toxicity. And that's more than enough.